Abraham Lincoln, C.S. Lewis, George Washington Carver, Albert Einstein. Leaders, scientists, writers all have one defining characteristic that unites them all together. All were homeschooled. Yet, despite these amazing figures, homeschooling continues to be looked down on as a form of modern education. Whether it be like jokes or offhand comments or outright opposition, homeschooling often seems to get shafted in the modern education circle. As a homeschooler myself, I was often confused and somewhat concerned about these comments. What I found is that most people simply don't completely understand what it means to be a homeschooler, and they have several misconceptions about homeschoolers in general. Chances are that some of you or all of you here today also share these misconceptions. So today I would like to address 3 of these misconceptions. Number 1, that homeschoolers don't work as hard as traditional schooled students, that they don't progress very far into college, and number 3, that they don't get involved socially with their peers and community. So hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll be persuaded that not only are these misconceptions patently false, but that homeschoolers should be held in as high a regard or even higher than traditionally schooled students. So although many think that homeschooling just involves sitting around in your pajamas all day, it's been found that homeschoolers are usually pushed as much or even more than traditionally schooled students. And while rigor is a fairly subjective and pretty hard to measure concept, most educators agree that one of the best ways to measure rigor is by through performance on achievement tests and AP tests. And so having said that, according to Kate McReynolds, a clinical psychologist and the associate editor of Encounter, she found that on average, homeschoolers perform better not only on standardized tests, but also on AP tests, the ACT, and the SAT. These are all basically like the biggest measures of rigor that we have for that's standardized across education. And even more specifically, according to a Washington Times article published in 2009, in a study of standardized test performance, homeschool students were found to perform around the 84th to 89th percentile in each subject, which when compared to the 50th percentile among public students is like a very, very large difference for homeschoolers. So in addition to leading to success on standardized testing and AP tests, the homeschool rubric can also be tailored to each student individually in order to push each student the amount that is reasonable for them, to push them as far as they can go while maintaining their natural creativity and intrinsic excitement towards the subject matter. And this is much improved over traditional schooling, which is always going to be confined by the number of students that you have and the variety of students, so you're only going to be able to move at the specific pace that was set ahead of time. So the second misconception is that homeschool students don't progress far enough to be admitted into college and excel in college. However, this is also patently false. In fact, the skills needed to excel in college are very well developed in homeschoolers. In a study conducted by the education researcher Molly Duggan, she reported that her research indicated that homeschool students were more likely to write clearly and effectively, think critically, understand themselves and others of different backgrounds, develop career goals, and develop good time management skills. All of these which are incredibly important skills to have in college. In addition to these skills that they developed, on average, homeschool students simply get better grades in college. In a study of around 185 different college students, it was found that 45% of homeschool students received mostly A's, while only around 20% of those who were never homeschooled received A's. The third misconception is that homeschool students don't learn to socialize and don't learn to interact with their community. However, in fact, homeschool students generally have a similarly or even more well-developed sense of self than traditional students have. In that same study of 185 students that I mentioned earlier, it was found that homeschooling had almost no impact at all on lowering students' self-esteem, and it didn't, in that study, it wasn't found that it affected their interaction with their peers in any way. In addition, on average, homeschoolers actually spend more time interacting with others in their community than traditionally schooled students. In one study conducted by Brian Ray of the National Home Education Research Institute, that included around 7,300 homeschool students found that homeschoolers are more likely to be involved in their community through events such as public meetings or even volunteering. This is stuck. Oh, there it goes. Awesome. Okay. So hopefully after listening to this presentation, you now understand that homeschooling is not simply for slower, less advanced, or socially uninvolved students, but that it is a learning framework that competes with and often exceeds the learning offered at traditional schools. I hope that today you've been convinced that homeschoolers, rather being the intellectual and social misfits that they're often represented by society, are actually socially involved learners that can excel in higher ed just as much as their publicly schooled